The first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Jason Frugier. He's actually the CISO for Fossil Group. Before that, he was a VP of Security for Signet Jewelers. So I've known Jason for a number of years. He's dressed down today. Normally, he's had a lot of bling from his different employers. But please welcome Jason. Next, I'd like to introduce Jeff Schilling. Jeff is the CISO for Epsilon Covenant. If you aren't familiar with those, you probably are one of their customers already today. Jeff leads a team of 80 plus engineers to secure a company of about 9,000 across 60 offices across the globe. So welcome, Jeff. And last but definitely not least, David Venable is the VP of Cybersecurity for Masergy. Masergy is a global security and communications firm. David has the distinction of being a former NSA, so he's already read all of your emails. So I guess I've done kind of a brief introduction, but we'll kind of go down and give each one of you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what makes your organization and your security program unique.
So, with Masergy, we have sort of an interesting dilemma, I guess, which is one, we're a security services provider, and I head up the internal security program. So this is a point of confusion quite often. It also means we get a lot of free products, which is really nice, because we use our own security services internally. So that's it results in some nice budgetary considerations. On the other end of the spectrum, though, it creates a number of problems, which is that as a security provider, you become a target for a lot of sort of bad organizations, right? Who want that credit of hacking the security company. So it's sort of a unique position just in terms of risk.
So it's great to meet you guys. This is probably the second or third time I've been here with the Tech Titan group, and it's always a pleasure to get the opportunity to share and actually learn from these kind of forums. I actually spent the majority of my early career in the military. I retired back in 2012, and in that role, in most of my roles in the military, they were CIO type roles or IT service management or product or major program management type roles. And it wasn't until my last two jobs in the military that I got the opportunity to get into cybersecurity. And really, it was one of those where you just get in the military. Sometimes they just throw you in the deep end of the pool and tell you to figure it out. And I had the good fortune, or I don't know, if the 2 years I was there, it didn't seem like good fortune of being the day-to-day manager of the DoD's Cybersecurity Operations Center for an organization called Joint Task Force Global Network Operations. Former NSA guy, probably know that group pretty well. And really, you learned a lot about the nation-state actors and what they bring to the game. But the other unique opportunity that we had is because we did have such a close relationship with Fort Meade and the NSA, is that you kind of got to peek over on the other side of the fence and see what the really good actors are doing and how they operate, which was a very interesting view. And after almost losing my mind for 2 years, they sent me to the War College and to get my head straight. And the Army said, well, since you did this for the Department of Defense, you're going to come run our Security Operations Center. So I did that for 2 years. And if you want to have a beer someday, I'll tell you, those were some of the most interesting times in cybersecurity in the department. And I always tell people I was like the Forrest Gump of cybersecurity. I was never the important person. I was the guy sitting in the back of the clipboard making things happen. And it was a very interesting time to serve. So then I had the good fortune of, after leaving the military, running the incident response program. And I always tell people the greatness about that is it was like going from the playing field where I was getting my teeth kicked in every day to stepping back into the press box and watching many companies do cybersecurity, how they, most of them, because it was an incident response practice, I saw them on the worst days. So I kept a really good notebook of how to focus, or what are some of the common mistakes that you see in the civilian industry, and I thought that I could not have asked for a better transition from military to coming to the civilian. Now I decided that the cloud is the next place where we're going. That's how I ended up here in Texas, and I work for a cloud security company here, Armored Defense, some of you guys have heard of probably. And that is the future of security, is figuring out how do we build secure infrastructure in the cloud. And that was a great learning experience, not only to work with some of the best developers and people orchestrating the cloud, but we had over 1,000 customers that had thousands and thousands of solutions that we hosted for them and protected for them. And then I always tell people, I didn't really plan my career the way it did. It just seems like I just did all these opportunities, kind of like an atom bouncing around in a chain reaction. And I ended up at Epsilon Conversant, which we're in the big data analytics for marketing purposes. And in all those experiences that I've had before, I've been able to bring to bear to the new role. And so I feel very fortunate that I didn't necessarily plan this path here, but I've seen to have the opportunity to learn along the way. And I always tell people I wasn't born with the wisdom of a 52-year-old man, but I've accumulated it over many years. So I appreciate this opportunity to speak.
I realized I made a terrible mistake sitting to the side of Jeff after that introduction. That's quite a background. So I've been working in information security for about 20 years. It's really all I've ever done. I guess just before I joined information security in a formal capacity, I used to be a Unix system administrator. But even in that capacity, I was kind of the security guy on the team. I always tell people security is really more of a mindset, more of a philosophy, and so I was always bound to work in this field. One of the examples I like to give, is that I can't, even go to a restaurant and sit down to eat dinner without at least once thinking about how I might get this food for free. Right? It's just the way we think, And so I've been fortunate enough to apply that throughout my career. I've had a lot of fun. I've worked for a variety of different organizations. I had a lot of fun as a consultant. I used to work for Fishnet Security. Some of you might have heard of them. Where I was exposed to really thousands of different organizations and what their security postures look like, and got a chance to work with their CISOs or other security leaders to help build up their security program, and it gave me a unique insight to what works and what doesn't in the security field. And then I decided to become a CISO myself. But not before I stopped at Citibank, where we had a huge global infrastructure, something like the Department of Defense, I think, with around 115,000 servers worldwide. And got to see what it looks like to be under constant attack with that size infrastructure. Somewhere in the globe, you're always being hit, and how to respond to large breaches in that sort of environment. So it's a great experience there. Today I'm with a much smaller organization at Fossil, but a much more fun company. Fossil is, we produce about 40 million watches a year. We're actually the 4th largest watchmaker in the world. We produce brands that are not just Fossil, but we produce for a lot of different companies we license for, like Diesel and others. One of the things that's unique about my role at Fossil is that we're on the cusp of taking the fashion industry into the digital industry. So I get to play not just in enterprise security as a traditional CISO would, but also product security. So I just got back from Vietnam, where we had our team there that builds the software, the Android iOS software that interfaces with watches, and is working to implement a DevSecOps program there. Still have a lot of work to do, but again, interfacing with Google to influence Wear OS security strategy, and just fun things like that are probably one of the unique aspects of my role, beyond just the traditional stuff, which is also quite fun for me. So, George?
So when you talk to CEOs or when you talk to CIOs or chief operating officers, one of the things that leadership talks about is when you come in, you've got a plan for your first 100 days. So maybe Jason or Jeff, I'll direct this to you guys. But when you started, I know Jeff, you just finished the first year. So when you came in, did you have a plan for your first 100 days, and what did that plan include?
Had an interesting interview process with Epsilon and also Alliance Data. Some of our Alliance Data leadership is here in the room as well. That was our parent company. A lot of them asked me during the process is, what's going to be your security strategy? And my answer was, I don't know. I don't know enough about Epsilon and Conversant to know what that is. I think I need to learn the business. And unfortunately, that was exactly the answers that the company was looking for, because I think they had tried many different strategies of trying to fit just a security template that necessarily wasn't tailored to the needs of the business and what made sense for the business. I'll just throw a tactical example out there. You force an organization to put security tools on immutable infrastructure that no one ever logs into anyway. If it goes bad, you just throw it away and rebuild it. So thinking about how to build a pragmatic plan, I was very fortunate in that the company gave me the first 100 days to learn the business, step back and not look at the trees, but look at the forest, and come up with what I call our threat-driven model, which is, now that once I learned what all the products did and who we support and who our customers were, it allowed me to step back and say, okay, here are the three major things that we should be focused on as a company in protecting the three major vectors. And then here are the outcomes. Here are here are the 5 things as a security team that we need to focus on. And I thought that was great that the Epsilon leadership team gave me that opportunity. And we had a lot of support from our CIO who kind of kept me out of the day-to-day tactical stuff while I got to travel around the globe, learning the business and talking to product owners. And like Jason, the first thing that I noticed that we had a gap is the CISO didn't have a seat at the table for product security, and building that function from scratch was important. All the teams were doing security, but no one was orchestrating that across the whole company. So that was probably a big aha moment of the analysis.
So my first 100 days, I follow pretty much a template wherever I go, which is really, the first 100 days are really a learning exercise. I try to do more listening than speaking. I have meetings with various folks just to build relationships. The tone of the conversation is always what's working, what's not working, any short-term or easy wins I can, solve for you, things like that. It's really building those relationships, because the next 100 days, you're going to start to ask for things, and it's going to start to strain those relationships if you haven't built them, right? So it's important in our field to have good relationships so you can kind of ease through any of the pains that our requirements might cause folks in their day-to-day. I did, in my first 100 days, develop an interim security strategy and a vision statement, because those were lacking for the organization. And I had to present to the board also on my point of view. And so I had to put together, just a deck kind of outlining, look, here's kind of, I'm surprised, I was happy to see a good security posture in place. There's some opportunity areas, but again, I'm fairly new. So we're still in the process of assessing certain things. One of my early, I would say, observations for the organization is that we were about to invest heavily in an ELP solution, which I squashed right away. And it was a very expensive solution. And I'll tell you the reason I squashed it, well, first and foremost, and I think this is kind of funny, is I've never talked to a CISO ever who said, man, I got to say, I absolutely love my ELP implementation. It is the best, right? I mean, no one says that, right? But also, I really didn't know the value of our data, right? So it's not to say you shouldn't have a painful DLP solution if you need it, but what's the value of your information? I mean, we're building watches at Fossil, so I don't know. I know obviously pre-release financials are important, but how important is the watch design? So we're going through the process of quantifying that and figuring out how we can take our security program and make it very adaptable to the company instead of just being very general. So then that's the overlying tone, I think, of what I set with the organization those first 100 days, is that they can expect a very pragmatic approach like that, with my philosophy towards how to best use our resources to secure the organization. So just kind of setting that tone, I think, for the first 100 days and keeping that consistent is very important for any new CISO.
So they both covered just a ton of what I was planning to say, but I'll also add in there, I always like to assume that you're compromised. when I start out, I try to real quickly learn, hey, what's valuable here? And if I were going after that, what would I do? And I started looking for those types of indicators. And if I can't find those types of indicators, then I've already identified some really high priority gaps of what I need to start implementing in order to be able to tell if I am compromised that way. So that's an addition to what these guys are saying.
So let me pick up on one thing that Jason said. So I've always said throughout my career, and I think I've been a little lucky to have been at SMU for 16 years, relationships have been the key to my success in cybersecurity. But because I've been there so long, I kind of take that for granted because, well, I just have naturally been able to do that. So how have you guys gone about building those relationships and helping get your program off the ground, right? So with my CFO, for example, I've got a great trust relationship with her, where if I need $1 million for a project, I've gotten $1 million for a project. But the challenge is you can't just build that overnight, and with CISOs transitioning so quickly, or other leaders, frankly, transitioning, whether it's a CIO or a CFO, you have to. It takes time. So how have you guys gone about building this?
That's a great question. I'll kind of step back and say the early or maybe first generation of CISOs were probably a fairly technical group of folks that were kind of promoted because there was something about security, so hey, you're the security person. And then they were early on invited to have business conversations, which they couldn't really have, and so they lost credibility as a strategist and kind of became a doer, right? So they weren't really elevated to the right level in the organization because of their lack of business acumen. They were more technical. And I think later companies hired the next generation of CISO who really was like, let's see if we can get our security posture at least as good as our peers in our industry. And today, I think we have a new generation of CISOs who are very business oriented and proving that business value by saying, how can we, even do a return on investment analysis, but also just customize our program to how it is we do business here and not just impose, my personal idea of great security on the organization, but instead make it a collaborative, meaningful security posture. It goes a long way to getting credibility with everyone, and to me, that's the foundation of a good relationship. It's just knowing that the person across the table from you is part of this company's success as well.
So pretty early on, both my boss as well as people across the organization helped me identify who the major stakeholders were that I needed to talk to on a regular basis. I said, I'm going to do this every month. That list got so big, because it's a pretty large organization, a lot of major product developers and technicians that, first thing I did was I made a list of people I needed to talk to regularly. And we truly are an IT company that does marketing. We have a lot of highly technical people. And so I think the talking point that won over when I sat down with all the major stakeholders is, I'm here to have the TCP/IP conversation, not a UDP conversation. And for those of you who aren't data nerds in here, that means it's two-way, back and forth. And that UDP is just, hey, transmit only. And I think that was refreshing for a lot of the folks, a lot of the stakeholders, because I did want to learn what they did. I did want to learn what they were working on. And I want to be a part of their product strategy going forward, because especially in the big data advertising vertical, privacy and security are going to be a selling point for us. This already is. I mean, we don't have a major, we don't talk to a major customer that doesn't come and ask for some type of third-party security assessment for the products that we build. And so having that two-way conversation of understanding the product strategy and figuring out how can we build security deeper into the product management process. We call it left and boom. Driving it deeper into product management. Because there's a lot of things when you're building a product. As a former NSA person, you know this, the deeper you get into that, the more you can resist against more technical actors, when apps and databases are built secure from the inside out.
Yeah, so took a real similar strategy here where identified the key stakeholders and we all get together at least once a quarter, try to do it more often than that. But in terms of finding understanding the business objectives and not trying to just force security onto the organization. And I tell you, a lot of companies that I've been with and dealt with, that's what's happened. Is a CISO came in and tried to just lock everything down to the point that it's far exceeded any real world risk that the company faced. I think this is it's sort of like what Jason was saying. CISO's got sort of a negative reputation because of this type of thing. So, I think really aligning with the business objectives, understanding that security is essentially a compromise in a lot of ways in a business, probably less so than in government. But becoming a sales enabler for one, showing customers that we are secure. You can trust us with your data. You can trust us with your network. You can trust us with whatever you do, rather than a cost center. Has been a pretty effective strategy.
So I'm curious, a lot of CISOs today report to their boards, right? So I actually got to do my presentation to my board this week. But I'm curious to know, do you guys present to your boards? How often do you present? And most importantly, what kind of questions are your boards asking of you? So I found questions that they're asking are getting better and better every year. And even some of the folks that are asking the questions aren't people that you would think that would be having these kinds of questions. So Southern Mass University is a Methodist organization, and we actually have a bishop that's on our board. And he asked a question that was phenomenal. It blew my mind this week. So I guess, curious to see your experiences there. I'll let you go first.
So I don't regularly present to the board. When there are specific things, then certainly. I spend most of my time dealing with the executive leadership. And, I've noticed the same thing. And I think NACD has actually played a big part in that because they've really increased the focus on cybersecurity. Oh, sorry, the North American Corporate Directors Association or something like that. So board members of most companies are going to be part of that organization, and they publish a lot of different information for board members. So they've increased their focus on cybersecurity pretty dramatically over the last 2 years, I'd say. And over that time period, we've seen that represented in the types of questions we get, certainly.
See, I'm in the middle, so I get to go second every time, so it's good. So for us, we have a parent company, Alliance Data, and they're actually the CISO for Alliance Data is one that actually talks to the board directly, and they talks to our audit committee. But we provide input, and there's 4 lines of business inside the company. And most of the data we present to them that they look for us to get that real-time picture is kind of, I would describe it best as benchmarking. What are some, and I won't get into all the metrics, but what are the metrics you have, and how are you benchmarked against the other lines of business? And then about once a year we do an assessment, a CEP assessment, where we benchmark ourselves against different types of industry, kind of a maturity assessment kind of thing. So I think that there's a lot of interest in our board for that. And then the second piece is because we're a public company, obviously we have a internal audit activity. And the internal audit is constantly coming down and assessing us against the policies of not only of Alliance Data, but the standards and guidelines that we write, and how well are we meeting those policies. So a update on where we are, where there's gaps in the organization, what we've done to fill those gaps, or something that our audit committee is very interested in as well.
So I've had a privilege of a variety of boards. I can tell you once I presented to a board after joining a different organization, not Fossil, and the chairman of the board waited until after my presentation was just about done, and he said, every so often, one of you guys comes in here, he said every couple of years, and you get some update like this that means nothing to me, and I want to know what value we're getting out of the security program. How many packets of the firewall dropping, or the IDS systems, or whatever you're buying. I took from that quite a bit. I thought, this is not what he wants to know. First of all, these are operational metrics that he's important. He has no desire to know how many packets the firewall dropping, but he doesn't know what questions he should be asking. So with that company, I spent several years on a journey to educate the board on how to understand and quantify risk and how to understand how we're maturing as an organization. That was a situation where I had a board where I didn't really have a technology advocate in hand, and that's a real challenge. So if any CIOs are in the room, you know that as well as I do. If there's no technology advocate in the room, in the board, it's very difficult to sell your challenges to them as well as what you want to do to better enable the corporation. So now today at Fossil, I do have a former CIO on the board, and so I've got a great advocate. So I get really good questions, but one of the biggest challenges I have is my board wants to get this kind of framework model for measuring maturity to say where are we today. And it's a challenge in security, so I'm actually working on how to dimension and change that mindset. So, for example, it's fresh off my mind, but in the last 2 years, we've seen a 180% increase in web application vulnerabilities, right? So if, say, in 2016, I were to dimension my security's maturity in the area of web app security, I might have said we're a 7. We're leading the industry in our security. But today, because there's a 180% increase, I might say we're a 4. And that's very frustrating for someone who wants to quantify you on a maturity scale to say, I thought you said we were a 7, now you're a 4, I don't understand. And from their point of view, that it's hard, you gotta educate them on the fact that security is a cat and mouse game. We're always having to adapt as an organization to where the attackers are going. So when you see that massive uptick in web app, you need to readjust and reinvest. And so you will backslide in maturity. And so rather than give it a hard maturity rating, what I'm trying to do today is take a different approach where I'm saying, we're either lagging, maintaining, or leading in this space, and that's our subjective score. And industry-wide, here's what's happening. So if we see, these kinds of DDoS attacks are going up, but for us they're not, that means they're probably going to start going up for us because in the industry they are, right? So we can kind of anticipate that our leading score today might become a lagging score, so there's no surprises. So I'm really working on that artful kind of approach. I don't think anybody's quite figured it out yet, but security is a little unique in this way, and board members are trying to sort it out, and so are we. So it's definitely lots of challenges in that conversation.
Just real quickly, so I take a very similar approach to this. I do a high, medium, low over 5 different metrics, which is policy, technology, human factors, risk and vulnerability management, and support. And really just a red, yellow, green on it. And I think that real succinctly on one slide conveys pretty much everything a board member is to be focused on.
So we've been dancing around this a little bit, and this is kind of a bit of a buzzword, I think, but we talk in cybersecurity circles a lot about what it means to align cybersecurity with the business. So it's kind of a broad subject, but how do you align cybersecurity to the business?
Can I volunteer Jeff to go first? Since it's always either Jason or myself.
This is going to be a big shocker. Business people want to know about revenue, right? So it really is, how do you draw what you're doing in cybersecurity and what capabilities you're providing, and a couple things. How is it protecting revenue, or what revenue is at risk, and what can they do to invest in that revenue, invest in that in cybersecurity to either bring down that risk, or potentially say we're not going to address that because it's going to have too much revenue impact. So what mitigating controls we can put, or what additional insurance do we need to buy? If you keep it all about talking about the how the impact is on revenue. For us, we have a scorecarding process, and we ran a revenue report in all of our products that we have that generate revenue. We have over 300 products. And so what we're doing is we're working on a scorecarding process that looks in about 6 or 7 different areas, and presenting that to the people that create those products so that they understand the risk, the cyber risks that they have from many different angles. And then we can we can pivot that data onto the revenue and our, both the product revenue as well as our customers that have those products in our major customers. And, because we're a pretty large, complex company, I focus on the top 25 customers. Because with the top 25 customers, I cover about 80% of the risk. And not that the bottom 20% aren't important, they're important as well. But a lot of times the things that we're going to do for those top 25 customers are going to address risk, in other areas. So that's what my approach has been, is to always try to bring it back in terms of revenue and risk. And those are conversations that I think CEOs as well as board members want to, like, those are terms that they understand.
Sorry about that. I had to do it after you were like, I never go first. So going back to something that all three of us previously said, I think it really comes down to really grasping what the business is, what the business is about, and enabling that business, enabling sales, enabling the things that make the company successful, rather than always being the guy in the room saying, or gal in the room saying, nope, can't do that. That causes security problems. Finding a way to make things work, to compensate for risks, and really showing that you're trying to enable business versus be a cost center, like I said earlier. In keeping those communications open with all the stakeholders and understanding what they're facing, identifying the risks with them, and then making sure that they understand, hey, this is what we're up against. This could really impact the business, and getting that buy-in is a real game changer. If you're coming at it from a directive approach, which works fine in the government, in military, NSA, well, but if a general walks in and says, do this, that's going to happen. Well, okay.
They don't fund you, then you don't have to listen to those.
Absolutely, that's right.
How much different from business?
Yeah. But yeah, getting that buy-in is really key in my mind. And the only way you get that buy-in is by proving that you're there to help them, not to hold things back.
So certainly I want to echo David's remark about enablement. I think that's really what it comes down to is, are you enabling or disabling your organization, right? What are you doing for? And so for what I do, for example, is when I have a new employee start, I always have them visit a retail store, a repair center, and a distribution center. And I have them spend an entire day at each of those locations because I want them to understand what it is that we do here at Fossil, right? Where the rubber hits the road, how we build stuff and everything else, but really to be able to translate when they project a best practices recommendation from a security point of view, what does that mean to the company? What does that mean? How does that translate into practice, right? So I want them to get the company so they become retail security people, not just security people. So that's probably one of the first fundamental things I do. But I'm also uniquely positioned to be a huge source of data intelligence. And so I'm doing something unique at Fossil, but it's not totally unique. Other companies do this too, but we're really pushing hard to get this in place. And I'll give you an example of what inspired me. Because I learned about a company in New York, a real estate company, that is not Donald Trump's company. They pipe their elevator utilization data into their SIEM, right? Which ours is Splunk. It's just a big log aggregator and forecasting analytics tool. But they put the elevator data into Splunk, and then they pipe their lease expiration data into Splunk. And so if they see a building that has elevator utilization going down and the lease is going to expire within 90 days, they forecast that they're not going to renew their lease, they're probably moving out. And so they go ahead and proactively put that building on the market. So they're using their security team for business intelligence. It's brilliant, right? And so I'm in the throes of piping SAP data into my SIEM through, buying some malware to make that happen, and any other business transaction data I can get into the SIEM for anti-fraud purposes and for everything else, but it also gives, not only do I return a tremendous value to the company by repurposing this amazing tool that we have access to, but I also get to see more context in the security event. So it's really a win-win. If somebody's attacking me here and I see some fraud over here, it's probably associated, right? But if I don't see the fraud in the sim at that time, I don't know. I don't know if that's a distraction. So as I continue to develop these e-commerce and anti-fraud use cases and things like that in my tool, I'm going to have greater context for security events, and I'll be better at my job and more appreciated in the organization. So there's a direct example, but again, going back to the very fundamental is just positioning yourself as a security person for the kind of business you're in. Again, a retail security CISO, right? If I'm working for a bank, I'm a financial services CISO. But we have to be that mindset and enable the business through that way of thinking.
That's awesome. I'm going to start piping my elevator data for my dorms into my SIM. See what I can do. I was having a conversation with my CIO recently, and we were kind of wrestling with this, but essentially the question was, how do you know when you've done enough, right? So you've got a bunch of tools, you've got funding, you're monitoring threats, you've got SIM, you've got firewalls. How do you know when enough is enough, and when you need more, or when you're okay not expanding your program?
Yep, when all the little things are green on the slide, you're good. So I would actually, in response to that, ask a question and say, is it possible to get to that point today? And I'm not sure the answer is yes. Just because everything changes so quickly right now, I think we'll reach a point where things stabilize to a degree, but we're not there yet. But I think with a lot of the big data and machine learning type approaches, I think we'll get to that point in the fairly near future, where we're finding attacks that no one had heard of before, that were unanticipated, things like that. I'm not sure that you can ever get to that point today. Now, in terms of probably the key thing I would look at is, here are all of our identified risks, and here's how we're compensating for those, how we're mitigating them, reducing, whatever the approach you're taking there is. And when that is to a point that the business is comfortable from that business point of view, I think then you're pretty good. You're still not at the point where, oh, we're done, cool, we're secure. But I think that's the best you're going to get in today's environment.
I'm kind of glad that I'm getting older because I can envision a future where security is not needed anymore because we've figured out how to build things secure from the get-go. And that's, if you think about bridges across the country, can you imagine if we built every bridge in the country that couldn't withstand 20 cars being on it? And now you have to go back and you have to retrofit every one of those bridges with reinforcing capabilities in order to make those bridges be able to hold the load that take, more than 20 cars. That's kind of the situation we are with the cybersecurity realm. For those who think the government, ARPANET created TCP/IP, I love throwing all those references out. And I think it was General Hayden, I heard him at a speaking event once, the former director of the NSA, say, we created ARPANET, but the security wasn't in the statement of work, so it wasn't created along with it. And I think as we move to move more and more the way we operate to cloud environments that are orchestrated by software and deployed by software and automation, and building what I call, it's the common term is immutable infrastructure, meaning once you deploy it, you can't touch it. Instead of fixing something that's running, you basically fix what's in development and you promote it into development. And that way the threat actors are really going to know where to go, because they can't get into your production systems. I think that's when we'll see less and less need for security people. And I can tell you, I always say I'm not a security person, I'm an IT person that does security. And I think that when we have IT people who say the same thing, and it says, hey, I'm an IT person, I'm a sysadmin, I'm a database administrator that does security, and I think that there'll be less and less need for us. And that's very philosophical.
I agree. It's a very philosophical question. I will say I'm probably on the other side of that. I don't think we'll ever not need as much security, or that we'll ever find a point where we're just perfect and we're good. I will say there are tactical examples. Like I like to use the cell phone, for example. These phones are using CDMA or PCS, and each of those has a small lightweight encryption under phone conversation, right? And if we were to say, wow, let's be ideal and make sure no one can ever break into the phone. So let's get something that's like FIPS 140-2, hardcore compliant encryption on there. Your battery would last like 10 minutes, right? So we had to be pragmatic and say, let's get good enough encryption, right? So you can have a couple days of battery, or 1 day, or whatever, of battery. So we had to reach a practical place where people were less able to break in, but not, not easy.
And we loved that approach at NSA.
Nice. I totally saw you up front. So, but it's a very pragmatic. But as more people begin to exploit that level of encryption on the phone, we have to advance it, right? We're necessarily, so security is always a cat and mouse game, right? What was good enough today is not good enough tomorrow. So the controls we put in today are, as computing power increases, encryption levels become less, what we thought was never going to be broken, tripled as easy to break now, right? So we're always going to be playing this cat and mouse game, and as the attack surface gets better here, suddenly we're putting our SAP system on the internet, or my garage door's connected to the internet, my barbecue pit's connected to the internet. I mean, we've got all this new attack surface that's got to be secured, right? So, and how do we do that? And then we've got 5G, and that's just going to magnify the problem to a whole new level, right? And so we're always going to be chasing technology. Fundamentally, though, I don't think security is a technology problem. I think it's a business problem. And technology can solve it or make it worse, but it's not a business. It's not a technical problem. So I don't think that as we get better with technology, security problems go away. Right? We're still going to have those problems. So, but again, it's a philosophical question. I think tactically speaking, we can get good enough security for the moment. But as you look at your leading indicators and you go, we better adjust, and we're going to have to change it again next year, right? Because people are starting to break in anyway. So you may be good enough for the moment, but you're not going to be good enough for long. So strategically, I don't think you're ever really good enough.
And all of that has really been from a technology point of view. As long as I can still send someone an email, get on the phone with them and say, hey, I'm in IT, can you install this security update? Let me email it to you real quickly, and then from there I have access to their machine, and from there the entire network. Until we address the human factors involved in this, almost none of the technology matters, ultimately.
All right, it's time for the lightning round. Each of you have 30 seconds to say the top 3 things that you can do to secure your business when it comes to cybersecurity.
I think for those, sorry. I speak really loud, so I usually don't need one of these. Actually, there's 6 things, but I'll only cover 3. Think about your data and think about a data-centric strategy. Think about what you have and make your security strategy focus on preventing a data breach, if that's what you do as a business. And so that's one thing is have that North Star. And for us, it's preventing data breaches as our North Star. If you're in an organization that has to be compliant, compliance is about half of what a CISO's role is if you manage regulated data, or if you're in scope of things like GDPR or the new California Consumer Privacy Act. Ensuring that you're continuously compliant, not just compliant when the auditors come around, is the other thing that you got to focus on, because while a lot of those controls aren't necessarily, or a lot of documentation, some of them are actual controls that make a difference, and making sure you're continuously compliant is what you focus on. I'll dovetail a little bit off of what David said. One of the cornerstones of our strategy at Epsilon is making the Epsilon associate or employee feel like they're our number one security control. If you don't take care of the human factor in the organization and arm them with the 5 things they should do and the 5 things they shouldn't do across the 9,000 employees that we have, you're really never going to have great security, because I can tell you in a phishing campaign, even if you have 3% that fall victim to it, that's still a pretty wide opening for a threat actor to get a foothold.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I think that one of the things that we tend to, I think the company tends to believe, is when they hire a CISO, they're covered, right? And we've got to make sure that they understand that's not true, right? The overwhelming majority of risk decisions are made in the field. And so, I think that, we'd like to believe that somebody like calls me every day and like, hey Jason, I found this USB drive out in the parking lot. I'm wondering if I should plug it in. That's not what happens, right? People just do what they're going to do. They take home their, intellectual property, thinking it's theirs. I mean, they don't know better. It's not always malicious, right? But it's our job to educate. Like, first and foremost, build that culture of security thinking, right? Integrate it into every aspect of your company. Everyone's always thinking about security, whether you're a developer, marketing, think it through. How does this look? How does this play from a security point of view? How might this guy get his food for free, right? Think like a hacker. Enable people to do that. I think that's the first and most fundamental thing you can do. And then secondly, don't get rid of the yesterday's thinking about a peanut butter approach to security, where everything gets patched in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, depending on the risk or whatever. Get a real grasp of your threat landscape and your asset landscape, and highlight those things, because the printer in your office is not as important as like your SAP system. So patch and focus resources where they matter, and then you can put less rigor where it doesn't matter. I mean, this is a time when everybody's tightening their belt, so they're going to love that message in the first place. But if you can shore up patching your most critical assets to 10 days because you're not patching everything in 30 days, you're going to have a lot less service interruption due to patching, a lot more meaningful security posture. So that's the second thing you can do, is secure what matters most. And I guess the third thing is make sure that you instill in your company that risk is a business problem. I think I've been to too many companies where there's a security engineer somewhere who's got a spreadsheet or a list full of risks that the organization is facing, and he sticks it in his drawer. And he stays up all night going, when is someone going to ask me for my list? And I think we've got to incorporate that sunlight on that list by getting risk operating committees in place and getting that strategic input into risk acceptance or non-acceptance. So there's sunlight on those challenges, so the company understands really what the risks they're accepting on a day-to-day basis are.
So first thing I would say is get everyone in the company to be of the mindset that they are a security person. That's a real game changer right there. If you can communicate to the entire company that every single person in the company needs to focus on security, risk management to some degree, that can be a huge game changer. Two, on a more technical, segmentation. There's something called zero trust networks out there today that is sort of an aspiration for a lot of CISOs, I think. I think this is the real way forward in a lot of ways. It actually solves a lot of the problems that we're facing. And it really goes along with what Jason was saying about patching things. If you can sufficiently segment your high risk assets away from everything else, then you can prioritize real easily on how to do this. The third point, Jason mentioned patching already. I'm going to mention it again because it's worth doing. Real quickly, when WannaCry came out, this was a huge denial of service attack. Ransomware attack. Came out a month after the patch that fixed the problem was released. So surely everyone patched then, right? No. A month after that, NotPetya came out and targeted that same vulnerability, had billions or trillions of dollars in impact. So it's still not being done. It's the brushing your teeth of security, and no one is still doing it.
So I think we got a couple minutes for questions. Does anybody want to have a question for the group?
Must be yes, no question.
Definitely not. So you mentioned the human, factor in all of that. What would you three do in order to make your organization aware in 3 easy steps, or just 3 steps, or however you would do it, of how to combat things like social engineering attacks and threats?
Well, I'll answer the question I wish you'd asked. No, I'm just kidding. When it comes to security awareness, I think that one of the things you gotta be careful is that you don't genericize cybersecurity for everyone. So we have a general cybersecurity curriculum that gets in the phishing email, and we actually do phishing campaigns as well as security awareness and those kind of things on a regular basis. But then you also have to pivot your security program on the job codes and specialties within your organization. Make sure that you give specialized training, because someone in our finance team needs to have a different understanding of social engineering than say someone from who's on one of our product teams and who's a sysadmin. So we've tailored our program to focus on 8 different job codes within our group, as well as the generic curriculum to kind of tailorize it to the best we can manage it, as well as give that generic or that general knowledge.
And I'll just add that you should also do penetration testing on each of those job codes. And I mean that from a social engineering point of view. Have someone actually try to do it after that training's been done. And honestly, most of the time, the first time, it'll work. But once someone's been gotten, you'll never get them again.
My answer to that is security is a behavior. It's not a competency. It's not a skill. So training someone, or you're sending them to the same training over and over again every year doesn't work, right? So people make fun of security training just like they ignore the sexual harassment training, right? They try and get out of it. And so when you think about it like a habit, there are ways to train people to do habits. We have corporate wellness programs that we incentivize those things. If you want to lose weight and you want to get people to exercise, or quit smoking, how do you trick them into getting a new habit? That's the question that I think is really interesting, that we'll try and figure out moving forward.
Yeah, I certainly agree that security is a behavior, certainly should be. Thank you for your time today, gentlemen. I'm Dwight Patterson with Robert Bowers from Tech Services. Our question is mainly for David. You mentioned 5 categories of cybersecurity. I'd like for you to mention those slowly again for us one time. And then I think you said support was one of those. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the most important thing in your mind about support?
Let me pull up my cheat sheet here. So one is policy, technology, human factors, risk and vulnerability management, and support. Support to me really covers 3 things. Budget, buy-in across the organization, and then, well, actually, let me step back and say 2 things, actually. I can't recall the third off the top of my head right now. Those are the 2 main things. You'll notice there's some really good statistics out there based on percentage of IT budget dedicated to security and how many breaches occur. I think like 8 to 12% is the sweet spot where companies get really secure. Below that, you'll just start seeing a significant increase in breaches. And obviously you got to spend the money right. But yeah, budget and buy-in are the 2 key factors to me.
Okay, great. I'm watching the time here, so I think we're about there. Is there one last question? I think we got one in the back.
their workloads to the cloud. And we talk about cloud and infrastructure as a service. There's a lot of security as an infrastructure also that the cloud provides. So my question is, as a security person, do you see yourself recommending companies moving internal workloads to the cloud and the ramifications of that being reduced expenditure on security appliances and budgets that you would otherwise have to spend? And also maybe there's another question for David. Because of this trend, do you see a reduction in sales, in firewall sales and other security appliances sales? What's the trend going on there?
Yeah, that's a hanging curveball and hard to play for me. I appreciate you throwing that question out there. I really, the vision I've put before our team and our company is I don't want our security people focus on managing equipment and managing infrastructure. I think the days, and I know we have a lot of security vendors potentially in this room, I think the days of selling us a bare metal box for us to manage are numbered. And if you're not on board with that, then you better get your product teams working, because there's more and more CISOs like me who don't want to outsource the mission to a third-party service like an MSSP, although they do great work. They really don't know your environment, but you also don't want to run your own gear. So I've kind of let all of our vendors know that infrastructure is not something I want to buy from our security vendors in the next 2 years. And so that's counterintuitive for a security person, because security people by nature don't trust people. Because you are trusting now that vendor is going to want to protect the data that you're pushing to the cloud, analyze, and to alert on. But I think we have to get over that, because cloud environments that are built correctly and have the right documentation in place are more secure than what I can secure inside of my infrastructure myself. I still find those, especially the startups, as soon as you start asking them questions about how, I flipped this on a conversation with a startup company that wanted to talk to me about their new tool, and then I flipped the conversation with him. I said, tell me about your security in AWS where you built your tools. It got to be really, really uncomfortable. So all those guys, and they're going out and building infrastructure in AWS. You better build it with security in mind, and you might as well. I would not be get a paying customer. I will not be a paying customer of yours until you can show me that third-party attestation that you're secure.
I'm going to add to that. I certainly believe cloud is the future. And, I work for a watch company today. I was just having a conversation with my boss about this very topic. I said, if we started Fossil tomorrow, we wouldn't say, well, let's run out and buy a data center so we can build watches better, right? It doesn't make any sense. No company coming off the ground today is going out and investing in hardware, right? They're all buying cloud services. They're buying Google Mail, they're doing Open Office 365, whatever they're buying cloud-hosted infrastructure. And even your fundamental ERP systems are being hosted in cloud today, right? So there's really very little reason to be in the data center business unless that's your core business, like a cloud provider or some other kind of service provider, or maybe a DoD entity or someone who can outsource certain things. But if you're not regulated out of the business, you probably are moving to cloud. And so from a security point of view, the best thing we can do, we have to shift our thinking. We have to build a cloud security strategy to say, depending on what types of data we're hosting on the cloud, these are the certain controls that they have in place, because we want to make sure that the cloud provider is at least securing our data as well as we would if we hosted it ourselves. But then we have to change our perspective and move more towards a audit. And now we need to, assess that cloud provider environment on a regular basis and make sure they're managing encryption keys the way we would want, or we're managing them, preferably managing them yourself, or whatever the case may be. Your passwords are being managed appropriately, etc. So now we become kind of an assessor to third parties rather than ourselves. So it kind of changes our thinking, but nevertheless, the cloud is, I think every company who isn't moving in that direction and they continue to hold on to that legacy idea that we need to host our own data centers that aren't in the IT business, they're holding on to the past. I really do think it's the future and where we all need to be going.
Okay, I had a tie on the last question, hands going up, so really quick.
Thank you guys again for the discussion. It's been really great. Tim Richards from State Farm. I had a quick question with regards to a comment that was made earlier around somewhat the maturation of the CISO role. Kind of starting off with being very technical and not business savvy, and through a couple iterations, we're kind of where we are today. With that in mind, I'm curious your perspective on 5 years out. What's one of the biggest challenges within the information security profession and our ability to make better secure and reduce risk for the business? What do you guys see as your biggest challenges 5 years out from now?
Well, from my point of view, certainly the biggest challenge is going to be positioning the CISO adequately as a thought leader in the organization. I think more and more companies, Fossil's moving fashion to digital, as I mentioned earlier. Most companies will have some play like that, where they're enabling, smartphone connectivity to their device or whatever. If you're in the product space, you're doing something to that degree. Are you talking to your security staff? Do they have any say to face off with the product managers, for example? Getting that voice in the room and being positioned as a thought leader in the business enabler, I think is a challenge today, and certainly 5 years from now, it's just going to be, worse, right? If we don't get that status elevated today. So, I guess that would be my answer.
I just think I think obviously we all have to become better with our business acumen. We need to speak those languages and show how we can provide business value to the business. But I'll tell you the big challenge that I still worry about is some of the technical debt of our customers and others. We still have people who send us data from AS400s. There are some that must be a great business if you still have that hardware somewhere and you sell repair parts. Because you'd be amazed at some of the largest companies in the world, their backbone data is still run on the S400s. And that's only going to get worse if we don't figure out how we fix that data problem going forward and get, there's all kinds of technologies now that are sticking what they call straws into that data, but still the data is housed on old technology. So I think blending all the new technologies that are emerging, whether quantum computing and all these other things with Windows NT and Unix, old Unix operating systems, I think is going to be something we're going to deal with for a long time.
Go ahead.
Just two quick comments. I would say, the first one, the Ponemon Institute every year releases a report on where CISOs report in organizations. The majority still report to their CIO, but as you heard a couple of times in the conversation, security isn't necessarily a technology problem, and that number has dramatically changed in the last 5 years. So a lot of CISOs today aren't reporting into IT anymore, and that trend will definitely continue over the course of the next 5 years. And then I'd say the final one is, how do you get new people into the profession? So, UTD is a big sponsor here. SMU just announced our global online masters in cybersecurity. So, there's something like 2 to 3 million jobs that aren't going to be filled in the next 5 years because of that deficit. So I think the CISO role is, I personally feel like it's one of education, whether it's educating the board, educating leadership, or educating the community. So, reaching out to the business and bringing more business people into the cybersecurity profession, because it's not technology, I think is something that we're going to have to do as CISO.
Okay, let's have a big round of applause.